Hello. This video will address exercise 2 in our GIS 101 class. And most of you, I think, are doing fine with this, but several of you have indicated to me that you're having some difficulties. And so I wanted to just try to make a video as brief as I can to highlight the steps that you take in this exercise. So most of this exercise is sort of a repeat from exercise 1. The idea was just to get you to use some data that's more local in nature from a place that's of interest to you rather than the one I picked in exercise 1, and to give you some exercise or more repeat work in trying to simulate what we did in exercise 1. So let me get in our content area under week 7. I have exercise 2 stored there, and I'll have this video posted here as well. And I've opened exercise 2, and we'll move it over to this screen that I'm recording on so you can see it. And as you see, I've tried to identify the specific steps for you to take here to give you as much detail as I can. I did not make a video initially for this because I was hoping you would be able to use what we did in exercise 1 to work through this, and it looks like most of you have, but again, I want to make sure everybody gets this, and so I thought it'd be worthwhile to make the video, and I think you'll all be able to benefit from this. So I'll go through these steps here real quickly and try to work it on my end so you can see how I would work through this material. So I'm going to move this exercise over to my other window so I can see it. I have 2 screens on my end, and I'm only able to record the one screen at a time. So I'll have the exercise 2 open in my other window that you're not seeing so that I can reference it, and hopefully on your end you either have it printed out or if you have 2 monitors, you can have it open in one monitor. Most of you will probably not have 2 monitors, so hopefully you'll have it printed out to refer to while you're actually following the steps in your one window on your computer. So what we're doing again is we're going to work with some DLG, DLQ, and DRG data. Remember, the DRG and DLQ data are both raster files, while the DLG data is a vector type file. Now, the raster data, I'm recommending that you obtain that from the Tennessee Spatial Data Server site, and I put links to that either on our site in referenced it in the handout, or you'll be able to find it under, let's see if I've got it under data sources, I believe, up here, and you'll have data provider links. And so here you see Tennessee Spatial Data Server and GIS Data Depot. And again, some of these links I've mentioned earlier in the semester, but if you're running something like Firefox, for some reason, sometimes links don't open properly in Firefox. And I'm using Internet Explorer here, and they should open in this one. So I've already opened the 2 sites here, the Tennessee Spatial Data Server, and which again has the local data for Tennessee. And then I've also opened the GIS Data Depot site, which is where you'll want to get the DLG data. So what we'll do first is, before we get any of this data, let's initially make some file folders that to sort of set up the exercise. And what I always recommend in my classes is that the students establish a working folder for each of their classes on the C drive. And we do this again on the C drive, as I've noted elsewhere, that we try to keep our names 8 characters or less, and by putting it directly on the C drive, it has a couple advantages. One, it's easy to get to and work with, and you don't have to go hunting around in other subfolders and things like that. And also, if we keep things 8 characters or less, that helps with some of the tools that we'll use a little bit later on, and particularly the DEM tool that we use. It has a tendency to like 8 characters or less in some of the file names with no spaces. And just in general, any of the tools that you work with that tend to be more of the DOS type format, which you'll know that opens up in a little separate window when you execute them, oftentimes they're not utilities that you actually install. You'll just copy them to your C drive or somewhere into a utility folder that you'll create, and you'll just execute the exe file. Those tend to start up in a little DOS window, and those types of utilities really like the old DOS type file names, which was basically, again, was 8 characters or less with no spaces. So some of the tools that we're using in GIS, and it's not just our class, it's actually these tools are used widely in the GIS profession. There are tools out there that still follow DOS type naming standards. So what I like to do is just get everybody used to using those 8 characters from the beginning, and it makes things much easier later on when we're working with DEM programs and files and things like that. We don't follow it 100%. Sometimes you'll notice in the utilities like the DLG to shape utility, it creates a subfolder that's much longer than 8 characters. That's okay. It tends to work fine. You can rename those folders if you want to, but you usually don't have to. So again, the problems with the naming structure tend to creep up in more of the raster type utilities than they do the vector type utilities. So we're good there. So anyway, what I've done here, I've created a GIS 101 subfolder, and in there I've created a subfolder for exercise 2. And I also asked you in the exercise here to create a base data folder. And the reason I have you put it out here directly under your GIS 101 folder is so you can use it throughout the semester to store various files and things that you might download that you might want to reuse in other exercises. So that's why we've created it outside of the exercise 2, but still within the GIS 101. So I've done that, and then what you want to do is, and I'm going to try to follow the steps on here. So step 1 was to select your area of interest, of course, and it can be anywhere in the state, someplace that's special to you somehow. Try to pick an area that we can narrow down to a quad, though. We don't want to get into any of the county-wide type data right now because those file sizes are just simply too large for what we're working with at this early stages in your GIS work. So try to stick with an area that we can narrow down to a quad. And it doesn't have to be perfect. A lot of times an area of interest will cover more than one quad. And for now, just get the one quad because at least it will give you practice with this exercise. And if you want to later go back and get another quad or something, that's fine as well. But for the exercise, to keep things simple, let's just stick with one quad. So the way you might do this is, you can look at a road atlas, or you might already know of an area in particular that you're interested in. And this will give you a rough idea of the location. But of course, oftentimes you still won't know what the quad is. And that's why I've loaded some other data that will help you with that here in a couple steps. So the first step again is to pick your general area of interest. Then we're going to set up our data folder structure, at least the initial structure, which we've done here. And then in step 3, we're going to obtain the TopoQuad index. And I'm specifically interested in the 1 to 24,000 index for this exercise. But in the file that I have for you to download, you'll also find that there is a 1 to 100,000 and a 1 to 250,000 scale index as well. And I just included those because I thought you might want to use those for a project you're working on in another class, or later in this class you might have an occasion to use it. So it's always handy to have some of these base data files because you'll use them over and over again in lots of projects, and they contain really valuable information. These indices have details all over the United States. So with them and a little knowledge that you can maybe gain from a road atlas if you need to, or just from your personal experience, you can oftentimes narrow down an area of interest right down to a quad level pretty quickly. So I'm going to show you a couple steps for how you can do that in this exercise. So to download the topo indices, just go to our class website, and let me see if I can pull that up here. And under the data sources link again, you'll find I've got some sample data for you. And here you can get, and now on my end, if you see this little symbol that's got the little, like a cloud over it, that says to make that file invisible on your end. And so just ignore those. If you see a file in here that you don't see when you're logging onto the site, it's going to be because I have it set to be invisible on your end. So just ignore those in my videos for now because I don't have any way of really hiding those from the video. I have different reasons for hiding those on your end right now. Some of them might have issues with it that I haven't quite resolved, or I might not be ready to share that with you just yet. I'm holding it for later on or something like that. So if you see listings in here that you don't see when you're on the site, don't worry about that. It's because I have them hidden for one reason or another. So on here, what you should see is you'll see the Topo Quad Index set with the NAD of 1983, and you'll see one that is 1 to 24,000 for the 1927. In this case, let's get the 83, and this is the one that also has the multiple quad indexes in it. So you can just simply download that file. I think everybody's familiar with how to do that. I won't download it on my end, but I'll select it so you can see what happens, at least using Internet Explorer. And it will open up a window, and down at the bottom you'll have a little dialog that pops up that's wanting to download quad index zip. It tells you how large it is, and you can simply save it. And what you'll want to do is save it as, go to save as, and open up your folder that we made earlier, and go to base data and just download it into that file by clicking save. I've already done that on my end, so I won't repeat that again. So once you get that, and once that's complete, then let's open up our Windows Explorer, and you'll be able to see the file there. And I've unzipped it on my end, and I just simply right-clicked on the file, onto the zip file, and I went to WinZip in my case. You might have 7-zip. Either way, you're going to pick basically the extract to here option. And if you select that, what it will do is unzip that file into the same subdirectory that you're currently in. So once I've done that, to avoid redundancy, what I'm going to do is take this zip file, since I've already unzipped it. I could delete it, but just for safekeeping, I'm going to use the cut and cut that out of that folder, go back to the 101, and I'm going to make under exercise 2, I suggest that you a little later on, but we'll go ahead and do it now. I'm going to suggest that you might want to make an archive folder, and in that folder just double click it to open it, and I'm going to right click again and say paste, and that will move that quad index over into the archive folder. Now you could make this archive folder under your base data folder as well, and in some ways it might be better there actually for this type of file, but I didn't want to confuse you because on the exercise later on I mentioned about creating an archive folder in the exercise 2 folder. So either place is fine, just make sure that you have it somewhere to where you can avoid redundancy by storing that zip file in case you ever need it again. If something gets corrupted in your original download files or something, you can always delete them and unzip this again and copy them over, and saves you some time. So now we'll go back into the base data, and you see again here we have 3 types. I'm going to highlight these are all of the files associated with the 1 to 250,000 scale quad index. And we have the Topo 24, which is your 24,000 scale Topo index, which is what we'll need here. And then we have the 100. There's also some other files here for another 250,000 scale quad index that kind of got thrown in with that mix somewhere along the way, and you could use either one of them whichever one you wanted to use. But for other exercises, of course. But for this exercise, you want these 24, the Topo 24. It's actually, I think, Topo Q24, and this is the file that you're going to be looking at. And remember that I point out that this is a little bit unusual file because they end with a .sdc instead of a SHP for shapefile or something like that. This SDC for our purposes at this point is very similar to a shapefile, so we're not going to worry about those differences right now. Just wanted you to know it's kind of it's a Esri, as I understand it. It's sort of an Esri proprietary type format, and it's a file that kind of conserves space like a zip file would do in a way, but Esri's programs understand the SDC format, and they're able to extract the data out of that without you having to do any kind of unzipping or anything like that to the SDC file. So for now, just treat it as you would a shape file. So we've got that downloaded, so that's some data for us. Now we could go ahead and start a project, but before we do, in step 4, I'm suggesting that you get a little bit more of the sample data that I have loaded for you, and this might help to give you some more reference in your area to help you narrow down your selection. For example, some of the data in here, and if you look through, I've got them here, is there's a states layer. There's a county layer. Oftentimes you'll know which county you're interested in, but you won't know the quads in that county. And so this can help you to narrow down to the county. And then there's some data for cities in the US. And so you can download all 3 of those if you like. And I'll go ahead and do that now on my end just so we have that for reference. And I'm going to pause the video. I'll download the first one while we're live, and then I'll pause the video just to save some time while I do the other ones. So let me get to my GIS 101 folder, and for now we'll download these into exercise 2, and I'm checking to see if I had you actually I had you put it into your base data folder, so let's go ahead and do that. We'll put it in base data, and again you might want to reuse this for another project, so that's why we do it that way. And I'm going to pause the video while I download the other 2 layers. I've downloaded all 3 of the layers, and you'll notice that when each one finishes, it tells you, if you're using Internet Explorer, it gives you a little message that it's completed, and it's got a dialog open here that's blank. You'll have to close that each time. That's just something that Momentum does. Whenever you open up a file, it opens in a new window. So we've downloaded the files. Let's open our Windows Explorer again. And notice I've not opened ArcCatalog or ArcMap yet in any of these steps. We're just, think of this as your data preparation phase. You're getting your data downloaded and organizing it a little bit, and in a few minutes we'll start up ArcCatalog and check our projections. So these files are zipped up just like your Topo Quad Index was, so you'll need to unzip those and just extract them to here again. Pick that option, and there is the states coming through, and I'll do the cities and the counties as well. Now I'm selecting these one at a time just for demonstration purposes, but I could have actually selected all 3 of those at once and unzipped them all in one effort as well. So I'm going to do like I did before. I'm going to select these original zip files, and I'm going to move them over to the archive folder just to conserve space. You might end up copying these files over to another computer or something like that, and that could save you some space. And again, this archive folder could be out under your GIS 101 folder instead of under exercise 2 if you wanted as well. I'm just trying to be consistent with what I put on the exercise here to avoid confusion. And another thing to mention, another reason for putting this GIS 101 file on your C drive is that it does help if you do move these projects to another computer. I know some of you are close to Oak Ridge and are able to work in the lab there, and you're moving your files back and forth. And if you do that, this helps you a lot because you can simply have a GIS 101 folder replicated on the C drive on both machines, and you can just copy and paste your folders here into that subfolder. So it makes it a lot easier for opening the project without those dreaded red exclamation marks that you'll see sometimes. So, okay, so we've downloaded the data, we've unzipped it, and now we've got some data we can work with. But the first thing we need to know is, has it been defined or not? What was our projections and have they been defined? Well, I note for you in step 4 that all of these data that we've downloaded so far has already been defined. But just to sort of demonstrate that, let me start up ArcCatalog so we can take a look at it, because it's always a good idea to do that. And we all make mistakes, and I might have thought it was defined and it wasn't for some reason or something. So I always tell people it's a good idea to check it just to be sure. And especially when you're first learning GIS, it's a good habit to get into, to check your data for your projections. And this is an issue that's never going to go away. You're always going to have this issue to deal with. Data comes in many different formats and many different projections, and you just kind of have to learn to deal with those things. And so that's why we're practicing it over and over in this class. And so those of you that have been frustrated by some of the projection issues, That, you know, it sounds crude to say, but in a way that's a good thing, because that's going to force you to kind of learn that. You know, we all go through that phase in our learning of dealing with the projections, and to me it's one of the hardest things to teach as well as to get a grasp on. But I guess all I can say is just trust me that if you stick with it, you'll eventually get comfortable with it, and you'll eventually kind of know what to look for in trying to determine these projections. And it just takes some practice, working with different data sources and different formats, and that's why we'll do a lot of that in this class. So just hang in there with it, and I really believe you'll get more comfortable with it as time goes on. Now, my art catalog opens in my primary window, which is not the one that's recording, so I'm going to have to move those windows over each time. So bear with me there while we do that. And here's the art catalog window, and let's go in now and let's open up the file on our C drive, and we'll check our connections there and see what the projections are rather for the files. So I have it again stored in the GIS 101, and I'm going to open that up and go into base data where the files are stored. And it's a little slow running on my end for some reason tonight. We'll be patient here, it'll pop up. Okay, and now I have under my base data folder, you can see out here in the contents area the different files that I downloaded. And you'll notice there's a couple layer files in here as well. I would just ignore those for right now when we're using them. You can use them if you like. There's nothing wrong with using them. I guess I just didn't want you to be confused by yet another type of file in there. And I think we've mentioned these layer files before. But just remember, they're basically a symbology file, and it's something you can create once you're in ArcMap and you set up your define your symbology. And if you spend a lot of effort getting symbology just like you want it, and it's a good idea to create a layer file, because that way you can reopen that file with your same symbology later on. So you can use those if you like or not in this case, but that's just wanted to mention what those were. So the way I'm going to check and see if they've been defined, let's just first select the cities. And you'll notice there's two types of cities. There's basically a cities here that, if I'm not mistaken, it has population 10,000 and over. And then there's a cities DTL for detailed. And that one has the populations 10,000 and under. Now, I may have that flip-flop, but it's one or the other there on those. And I think I'm telling you right. It's been a little while since I've looked at that file, but basically they're two different sets of cities. One is a lot more detailed and has all of the little smaller cities in it as well. So we'll look at just the first one for now, and I'm going to right-click that file and go to Properties. And under Properties, we can click on the XY coordinate system. And under here we see it says current coordinate system, and it has been defined. It's giving us a coordinate system in here that Esri has assigned to that one already for us. And it's geographic and WGS 1984. Now that 1984 is important to note, because it might cause later on when we're working with some NAD 1983 datums, when we're working with both types of files in our ArcMap project, it might give us a warning about the different coordinate systems. And I just wanted to point out to you that for our purposes, if you ever have a file that is stored with the datum of 1984 and one that's 1983, just treat those as the same. I mean, they're technically different, but what I'm saying is they're almost identical for our purposes that we're working with, and you can use both of those in the same project. So you don't have to go in and reproject those files, because we're going to actually do a reprojection here in a little while on an NAD that's 1927. And on those, in that case, it is a good idea to reproject the 1927s usually into a 1983. You could do it the other way around if you needed to as well, but typically we're reprojecting into the 1983 datums. and that's just usually because it's a newer datum, and it's also one of the most common datums now for data that's out there. Unfortunately, the USGS based data sets, sometimes they're older because they were created, some cases, 15, 20 years ago. But the flip side of that is they're also the most detailed in a lot of cases. So they're good data, but they were created in an older datum. And so a lot of times our raster data now is coming to us in a 1983 datum. And in those cases, it's often a good idea to reproject the 1927 files. I'm going into a little more detail, and I'll try not to get too sidetracked on you here, but some of these things are just, it's easy to mention them while they pop up here. So, so this one has been defined. We don't have to worry about defining it. We can see that here. So we're good on that one. So now we can look at the cities detailed. It will be defined as well. And you can see it's defined there. Our counties, let's look at that. It's most likely defined. Yep. All these are WGS 84, looks like, and that's what Esri used. And let's just look at our Topo Quad 24. And it too has been defined. And notice it is in 1983 geographic here. So that one's been defined. And then lastly, let's look at our states.shape layer and check it. And under coordinate system, and it too has been defined. So we should be good to go with all of those files. We can actually start an ArcMap project and put those files in it. So we're going to our next step, and I believe that's what we do in our next step. And step 5 is to create a new ArcMap project. So we're going to do that now. I'm going to start up ArcMap. Now I'm going to pause the video here just a minute while it boots up, and I'll move it over to this window. Okay, I've got ArcMap open now, and I can start a new blank project. And just wanted to point out, you may have noticed that I minimized ArcCatalog instead of closing it. And oftentimes I'll give you instructions. I'll tell you to close the one program before you open the other program. And that's a good rule of thumb to follow. In this case, I'm going to violate that, I guess, for the sake of time. And also, I know where I'm at with these files here. So I should be fine. But the reason I suggest closing one whenever you're opening the other one is oftentimes, especially when you're just learning GIS, you'll have a tendency to work with a file, say over in ArcCatalog, for example, that you might have accidentally tried to load into ArcMap before you remembered to define the projections, for example. That happens, that happens all the time. And in that case, if you had tried to open it in ArcMap, and then remembered you needed to go into ArcCatalog and define the projection, you left ArcMap open, or you go into ArcCatalog and define the projection, then you try to load it back into ArcMap, maybe the same session that you were in before, where you'll get weird things happen sometimes. Sometimes it won't load correctly or at all. Sometimes it will load just the way it did before you defined the projection. Strange things can happen because basically you can think of it as it's still in memory in ArcMap. If you load something and then take it out, until you save the project or even close the program, sometimes remnants of that file, and I'm just speaking generally, this may not be literally, but this is the sort of the way it works, it will remember those things in that program. So it's always a good habit, especially if you're working back and forth with files, to just close one program and open the other one. I know it takes a few minutes longer, especially on my old slow machine here, so I have a tendency to violate that, but that's just a rule of thumb. But it can help you a lot of times when you have strange things going on that you can't explain, and you'll realize, oh, I had the program open, and that can help. So in ArcMap, I'm going to start a new project. I'm going to just start a blank map. So I'll just say OK. And in this one, I'm going to look at the instructions here to see exactly how I told you about defining it. Okay, I tell you to just load your quad index in here. Now, a lot of times as you progress in the course, you'll get instructions that will say define a projection for your data view. And on an exam, for example, I might ask you to define a projection for the data view. And just keep in mind, and again, this is some of the stuff that will be a little confusing at first, but you'll get used to it, and eventually it will become second nature to you. But just for now, keep in mind that your data, your individual data sources, all have a projection. And in your ArcMap project, you can define a projection for the data view itself. And that projection can be totally different than what your files are defined in. Essentially, what will happen is anything you load into the data view in ArcMap will get reprojected on the fly into whatever projection you have defined for your ArcMap data view. So let me say that again. Your data files themselves each have a projection that has been defined for them. And in the case of the data we have here so far, it's already been defined. Now, some of the data we're going to get in a few minutes has not. And you always define your data in the projection that it is actually created in. Not necessarily what you want it to be in, but what it's actually been created in. When you got the data, the source you got it from, you need to determine what projection that data is in when you get it. And then you define it as such, and then you can load it into your ArcMap. Now, if I don't go in here and define a projection, which if I did, by the way I would do that is I would right-click on this layers, which is the data frame. I could go to properties, and I could go to coordinate system, and I could basically select the coordinate system I want here and define it that way. Very similar to what you would do with an individual data file. So since I didn't tell you to do that in the instructions, I'm not going to do it just yet because it gives me a chance to show you another important point. But that's how you would do it. You would select your projection from here and say OK, and it would set up this data frame in that projection. And again, with that being the case, any data we loaded in, as long as it was defined properly before we loaded, it will automatically reproject on the fly, we call it, which is basically saying it's going to temporarily reproject it. It's not actually writing it to the data file. It's just reading that file in and on the fly converting it into this projection. The original data file itself is not changed. It's only changed in the memory of the ArcMap program. So I know that can be a little confusing at first, but that's what's going on. So now if I don't define that, I'm going to say cancel here, and I'm just going to do like I gave you in the instructions. I'm going to load that TopoQuad index. Now let me back up here. Before I do, look at my coordinates down here in the lower right. Oops, hopefully you can see this. They're on the lower right, and just in case it's not coming through in the video, where my mouse is right now, it's showing up like 838.052 by 12.458, and it says unknown units. And so that's basically, it has no projection defined right now. So nothing has been said. It's basically just using like pixel units off of the screen at this point. Now watch what happens when I load my first data file. So if I go up here and add data, and I go over to the C drive and go into the GIS 101 base data, and I'm going to load that Topo Q24, and I say add, and it loads the file in for me, and you can see it load on the screen here. It's a very detailed file because it has, again, I think it's about 50,000 or so records of every quad index in at least the contiguous 48 here. But now look at my coordinates down here in the lower right. They're in decimal degrees for the units, and it's basically giving me a lat long type number. It's giving me a negative 84 degrees by 33.58, and that's latitude and longitude. And so what the data view did in essence is the data view got defined for us automatically by the first layer that we loaded into here. Since I didn't predefine it before I loaded anything, then the first layer you load is what the projection is going to be. And so that's set now in this particular ArcMap project. It is now, the data view is defined as Geographic 1983 because that's what my TopoQuad layer was in. So if I try to load a layer now that might be, say, UTM 1983, then it's going to take that UTM and reproject it into Geographic as it loads it into this data view. There's nothing wrong with that at all. That's just the way it works. That's the way ArcMap has to handle the files as it loads those. And again, it would not manipulate the file itself, at least for saving it on that file. It only manipulates it temporarily in the workspace of ArcMap. And that's fine to do that. There's nothing wrong with reprojecting on the fly. Some people are very particular and they want all of their coordinate systems to be identical, and theoretically that's the most correct way of doing something. But it's very time consuming and tedious, and when you're first starting out, trying not to overwhelm you too much. Everything's so overwhelming, I know already. And so don't worry, basically don't worry about reprojecting stuff as long as the datums are the same. And the only exception to that would be if you have a WGS 84 and an NAD 1983, just treat those as the same for our purposes. So you don't have to redefine any or reproject any of those, at least for now. So okay, so we've loaded that layer up and we can see all of these quad indices. Now we know about where Tennessee is. Of course, we could zoom into the Tennessee area here to get closer a little bit, but you can see we still just have a bunch of squares. It's basically, from this, we can't really determine anything about an area that we're interested in. And so what I'm going to do is load another layer or two just to help with that process. So let's go ahead and load some more here. I'll load up the state file first, and I'm just going to take the state.shp instead of the layer. The layers are colored and they'll tend to hide what's underneath it, and so you could do it either way though. It's fine if you want to do that. And actually the shape file still is a solid polygon, so it's hiding those layers as well. Now I could make this layer clear, or I could just take my topo quad index and drag it up above the states file and see it. But if I do that, then I can't see the states file again, right? So either way, you're going to have to change one or the other. So I'm getting a warning about my momentum being logged on without any activity for a while. That's what the bell is. So I'm going to shut that down right now while I'm thinking about it here to avoid any more interruptions. Okay. So what I'll do, I'm going to drag the states back on top again, and I'm just going to set those to hollow, which is basically just going to have the outlines of the shape of the states with the shapes set to clear. And I'll thicken up the outline a little bit just so it will stand out a little bit. And when I do that, you can see kind of an idea where the state is and where all these quad indices are. Now for my area, just kind of pulling it out of the hat, area I'm a little bit familiar with around here is called Ozone. There's a neat little waterfall. It's called Ozone Falls there. It's up here on the Cumberland Plateau, not too far east of Crossville. And I know about where Crossville is, so I'm just going to zoom in just a little bit and roughly in this area, I think. Still don't have much detail. Now I could go in and I could turn on the labels for the topo quad, right? And that would help a little bit. And I'm going to go ahead and just say, where is it? Label features, and hopefully the name, the name file has already been assigned the property to show up as the label. So I just turn on the labels and it pops up the names. And I can see, just looking around here, I see ozone right here in the middle. I guess they're pretty close because it's right in the middle, and that's most likely the quad I want. But just to make it a little more comfortable of it, what I'm going to do next is load in another layer. Let's load the counties in. So I'll load the county files, and I'm doing these one by one in this example just for a demonstration. You could load all of them at once and then define your symbology like you like and do it that way as well. Now here's that warning I mentioned earlier. Because that layer is actually stored in a different datum, then it's giving me this warning. Now this warning doesn't come up because, and this is something I wanted to point out, it's not coming up because I have one in geographic and maybe one in another coordinate system, which in this case they're all geographic. But if I just wanted you to know that you don't get this warning because it's technically a different coordinate system. You're getting it because it's a different datum. So that part of the projection is what's causing the warning. And again, like I mentioned before, the 1983 and the 1984, just treat those as the same. I'm going to say go ahead and close. What you don't want to do, though, don't tell it to not warn me again, because this is a good idea that it's warning us. But if you select that box, it won't pop up this warning anymore, and that could be bad. Because we would want to know if we had a 1927 layer mixed in here with the 83s, right? Because we'd probably want to reproject that 27. So in this case, we're good. So I'm going to just say close, and it will load that layer up. And let's go ahead and set its symbology to hollow as well. And we'll make the outline for the counties a little bit thicker, and I'll just change the color to a reddish color so it will stand out a little bit. And there we go. And this county, I know from the shape and the location, is Cumberland County. And most likely the area you're interested in, you'll know that as well. You could turn on the labels to kind of verify that, and you can see it popped up here towards the middle of each of the polygons, the name of the county. And so I'm even more comfortable now that this is the quad for the Ozone Falls area. So I'm comfortable enough that I would go ahead and go with that in this case. If you still were a little bit uncomfortable, you might want to load the cities layer. And just for fun, let's just load that cities detailed layer. And that should pop up. It gives us a warning again. We'll say, oh, just close. And that should pop up quite a few points throughout, and you can see them here. We can turn on the labels for those, and that pops up the names of the communities. It's a little bit mixing in with the others. We can change our symbology and so forth to make that stand out. I'm just going to turn a couple of the layers off for a minute so I can see them that way. And I can see here I've got Crossville, Fairfield Glade, Crab Orchard, and Ozone. There's actually a little community called Ozone there near Ozone Falls. So with that information, I would be very comfortable that that's the quad that I wanted. So you can follow something like this similar for your area of interest, and hopefully you can narrow it down to at least one or two of the quads that it's associated with. And you can see another handy thing about doing this is that you can become familiar with the different quad indexes that cover your county of interest. So you might, I might have wanted something up in the northern part of Cumberland County, and I can see that either I would be looking for either the Iselene or the Fox Creek or maybe the Hebbertsburg quad if I was interested in that area. So this is handy. I think you'll appreciate this when you look at an area that's of interest to you. And just realize the really cool thing about this is this system is applied all over the United States. So you've got some, I want to say 54,000. I'm just going to open up my attribute table for the Topo Quad Index so that we can verify that. And we've got, yeah, 53,911 different Topo Quad indexes in that one layer. So you can see how helpful that could be. You could basically do this same process for any part of the country that you're interested in. You could pick up a road atlas and kind of narrow it down and get it down to the county of interest, and then follow the steps we did here, and oftentimes get the quad for an area anywhere in the country that you're interested in. So with this information now, we know that we're looking for the ozone quad. And so the data we're going to be getting here in a little bit, that information is going to be helpful. We're also in Cumberland County. If we were looking for a county layer, that would be helpful. So let's go ahead for now and let's just save our project. And what I ask you to do in this one, just to make it easier to find, is we'll save this as EXER2. And I'm just going to put it in the root level of the EXER2 subfolder for now. So I'll go into my GIS 101, EXER2, and I'm just going to save it right there. And so we'll call it EXER2, and the program's going to tack on the .mxd for us. So I'll just say save, and oh, okay, this is interesting. I'm getting a little bit, this is popping up from another extension I have installed, and it's interesting because I've never seen this pop up before. So it's probably seeing where I had this similar exercise last year or something, and it's sensing that I have that file stored somewhere. So I'm going to go ahead and just cancel that. Just ignore this for your end, because odds are you won't have the Xtools program, so you won't see that little dialog pop up like that. Now on mine at the top here, I can verify that it did save that as exer2.mxd, and so now you could go ahead and close ArcMap. And that's probably the best thing to do. On my case, I'm going to just minimize it for right now. Again, similar reasons that I did for the art catalog. My computer is pretty old and slow, and rather than waste time on the video trying to open and close them each time, I'm going to minimize them. But again, to be safest, especially when you're first starting out, it's probably a good idea to just close them and then open them back up when you need them. So now let's move on to step 6, and we're going to obtain some DOQ and DRG data from the Tennessee Spatial Data Server. So let's go back to I had already pre-opened that, And we can open it here on your end, if follow the links to get there, or just note what I've highlighted here at the top of the screen, and that will take you directly to this site. Now, in this site, they've got a lot of different data just for Tennessee and sort of the adjacent states if it overlaps a little bit. And they have a nice set of selection of data for DOQs, which again is the orthoquads, and the DRG, which is your topo maps. But they tend to be in different projections. So another good reason for using this site and the exercise is that it gives you some practice with seeing those different projections a little bit. In this case, you don't have to do much other than define them, though. So we'll want to download, let's go ahead and download the raster data here for the quad that we're interested in. And again, avoid the countywide data. So when you click on the data collections here, if you're not already there, click on data collections. And this is the different types of data they have available. We're interested in this digital ortho quadrangle. And in here, you see you've got a variety of options. And so the tendency is to jump over and grab that county layer, but it's a huge file. It's in a different projection than what we're finding in our quad, notice. And notice how they give you the projection. Sometimes what they say up here in their paragraph, they'll tell you one thing, and then you look down here and it tells you another. So always check both locations. And in this one, in this case, if you get the quad data, it is going to be in geographic 1983 data. So that's the one you're going to want to use. So let's go ahead and click that. Remember, it's geographic 1983, and they have it organized in this case by quad name. So I would want to scroll down here. Luckily, it's alphabetical for us. So I would scroll down here to the O's, and hopefully I can find the ozone here. There it is. And I'm going to right-click on that and click Save Target As. You can left-click a lot of times, and it will pop up the little Save dialog as well. If not, then just right-click on it. And if you're using Windows Explorer, that is. And in this case, it remembers that I was in the base data folder, so it's already wanting to put it in there. So what I'm going to do in this case, I'm going to bump up one level. I'm going to go back into my EXER2, and I'm going to create a new folder. Now, I could have done this back in just the Windows Explorer, but with the Internet Explorer, it lets me do it on the fly, so to speak, as well. So if your program is not letting you do this, then go ahead and cancel it and go back out to Windows Explorer and create your other subfolders first. So what I want to do here is create a subfolder called DOQ, and while I'm here, I'm just going to click out of that and create another one called DRG. And I'll just go ahead and go crazy here. Click another one called DLG. Uh-oh. Guess I did go crazy. I lost my window. Hang on here. Let me get that back. Oh, there it is. Okay. DLG. And then I'm going to open the DOQ because that's the data file I have here. It's already named it to Ozone because it knows that's what it was when I tried to download it. I'll leave it like that and just click Save. And it downloads it. You can see, looking at the size, it looks like it's about an 8.3 megabyte file. So that used to be a big deal. Now it's a matter of seconds in most cases, depending on your internet speed. But it always never ceases to amaze me how fast things are compared to the way they used to be not very long ago. So we've got that file downloaded. So let's back up one. I'm going to back up to the previous window, and let's go ahead and get the DRG file while we're here. So we can download those by quad or by county as well. In this case, we want the quad. And notice that the projection information is not right on the name here like it was on the other one. It's just an example of sort of inconsistencies from the data provider. So we look up here, and in the paragraph, though, we read through it, and we can see that it's geo-referenced to the UTM grid, okay, but they're available as Tennessee State Plane NAD 1983 in feet. And that's the one you want to keep in mind. So a little later on when we define these projections, we'll want to use Tennessee State Plane NAD 83 feet for our DRG layer, and we want to use geographic 83 for the DOQ layer. So let's go ahead and find the layer for ozone. And again, they're organized alphabetically by quad name. So we can scroll down here to the ozone and right click and save target as. And we're not going to overwrite the other one because it's in the DOQ subfolder. Instead, I'm just going to move up to one level and then move back down into my DRG subfolder and save it there. And it downloads very fast in that case because it's not nearly as large of a file. So we've got that, we've got those two, that's our raster data. Now, let me catch up here on the steps. Okay, and then on step 7, we go ahead and get our DLG layer out of the way. So we'll go ahead and do that. And I've already got the window open here on my tabs for the Data Depot as well. And so we'll click on the Download GIS Data. And as I mentioned before, this is a really great site for getting a lot of data. And a lot of their data is free. And I'll try to stick the best I can with the free data when I'm recommending you get stuff from this site. So don't ever feel like you have to purchase the data. When you set up an account, which they do require you again to set up an account to use their site, but you don't have to obligate to giving them any money. You can set up a free account as well. And if you want to ever put money in it, you can do that too. And so it's a nice service. They've been around for years and years and years, and so I like to use them. They seem to be a real reliable site, and they've got a lot of different data. And fortunately, they've got a lot of data from the USGS, which some years ago the USGS cut back on their server space. And a lot of the files, like the DLG files, for example, you used to could download those directly from the USGS. And in my classes, I used to show you how to do that. And then they shut down a lot of those servers, and they basically farmed out the vendor service to just a couple of selected vendors, and the Data Depot was one of their vendors. So that, to me, is another good testimony for the site. But so the Data Depot will tend to have all of the DLG data. At least in my experience, they'll have whatever was provided by the USGS. So if you don't find it on the Data Depot and it's a DLG layer, then the odds are it doesn't exist. So, and remember, as I pointed out elsewhere, the USGS did not make individual DLG layers for every quad. They tried to, and that was, I guess, the initial goal. But over the years, that either for one reason or another was not attainable, and so they didn't get every layer for every quad. But still, they got the biggest majority of them. But sometimes you'll hit a quad, and a couple of you have, I think, found a quad or two here in Tennessee that you couldn't find data for, and that does happen. It's not real common, but there are a couple places that tend to pop up again in these classes. I think because a couple of them are in East Tennessee. But there are a couple places that they don't have the layers for that. And so if you bump into that on your end, then just go ahead and pick another area for your project, because it would be much easier than trying to dig around on other sites and find it. Because like I say, I don't think you'll find it if they don't have it here. So in my case, hopefully they'll have ozone. I'm pretty sure they do, but we're going to find out. So when we get to this point, let's just click on Tennessee. And we're interested in the county-wide data. So I'm going to follow that path, and you need to know which county you're working in. So it's another good reason for having that county layer. So in our case, in the example here, we're in Cumberland County for ozone. So we'll go to Cumberland County, and then here is all the different types of data that they have available. And the one we're interested in for this is the DLG at 24K, which is your 24,000 quad. And again, they're organized by quad alphabetically. And sometimes they'll run on multiple pages. Most of the ones for Tennessee all fit on one page, but depending on the state, some of the western states in particular run across pages. So you'll see they're organized by quad name. So let's scroll down and see if they've got ozone, and there it is. And notice here again, they show a fee. You can pay them money to burn it onto a DVD or CD for you. But in this case, as long as you see the green download button, you know that's a free download. They also have a premium download, which, I don't know why you would want to use that in this case since you can get it for free. But in some cases, if you're dealing with raster data, certain raster data files, again, and I know I've pointed this out elsewhere, but some of them are only available as for fee. And those are the cases where you would probably want to go to another site and download them instead of paying money to get them here. But you can, and I've done that on occasion. I've needed to get some of their premium data, and so I've myself, I've given them a little bit of money, and it's worked fine for me. But for your purposes, again, we're going to try to stick with the free data, so don't feel like you have to pay for these downloads at all. So just follow the free link. And before I do that, I'm going to click on this more info just to point out to you, they do have some metadata associated with about all of their data. Now sometimes it's more detailed than others, and sometimes it will give you the projection right up front, sometimes it's not right up front. And so it can be a little bit difficult to find sometimes on the projection data. And so, you know, just scrolling down through here, just looking, I'm looking for something to jump out at me. And I think I mentioned to you before in a previous video that most of the DLG data from the USGS comes out in NAD 1927, a UTM 1927 projection. And I don't see it offhand here. I'm looking to see. It tells you all about the data itself, which is good. Let's see, looking down through here. I don't see it. Yeah, I don't see it in this file. And unfortunately, I'm going to click back, most all of these more info links, when you're dealing with a set file type, like all of these are DLG file, if you open any of these links, it's taking you to that same page in this case. It's not a separate file for each one. So that's another thing to keep in mind about this particular site. The metadata is pretty good, but sometimes it's not quite good enough. So in this case, you know, we really would like to know for sure if that was in NAD 1927. Now, I'm going to assume it is for our purposes here because, like I said earlier, nearly all of the USGS data, especially the older vintage, come available in that UTM 1927. And another clue is that it's stored in this SDTS format, which is an older format that they used to use. And very rarely do you find it in a NAD 1983. Now there are a couple occasions, and a couple of you have noticed where I pointed out on a video some other clues to look for in your data to see. And I'm not going to elaborate on it in this one right now. Instead I'm going to tell you to go ahead and assume that yours is UTM NAD 1927 unless you have some hard evidence that it's not. Okay, so go ahead and assume that for now, and I would venture to guess that 99 times out of 100 that's going to be correct. And we don't really have any other info to go on to change that right now. So we'll go ahead and download it and see if we see any clues in the downloading process. So we'll step over here and download. They're a little tedious because they're a little cumbersome. They're all close to each other there, so make sure you're getting the right one. And if you have not logged on already, it will prompt you to log on here. So I'm going to log on and I'll be right back. Okay, once you log on, it will welcome you back, and unfortunately what it does, it takes you back to the list. At least it doesn't go back to the previous list, but you do have to go back and find your quad again here and click on the download link once more. And then it will take you to the data they have available for that quad. And as it turns out, Ozone has quite a few layers available for that. So you can get what you want at this point. I think I pointed out that you might want to get the hydrography or the hypsography. And those are just kind of two of the more popular layers. They're more interesting to work with. That's why I pulled those out. You can get whichever one you want. It's just I wanted you to go through the exercise of getting that. So I could get in my case, I'm just going to grab both of them. But the hydrography, remember, is your water features. And the hypsography is your topo lines. And again, remember, all this DLG data was pulled off of the topo map, which was a raster source, but it was pulled off as vector data. And so it's very detailed. And we'll run into this later when we work with Tiger data. We'll talk about this again on the differences between the two in terms of detail. But this data is very detailed, as I've pointed out elsewhere. So let's go ahead and just download that. We'll get the hypsography. If I click on that, it prompts me down here, do I want to save it? And I'm going to say yes, and we'll save as. And I'm going to go back to the EXER2 and go into the DOG folder I created. I'm just going to save it in there. And again, it's pretty fast. So then we'll get the hydrography next and save that. And notice I'm clicking Save As because I want to make sure it's going to the folder that I want it to go in. And just that fast, we have it downloaded. And so now you could close this site down. You could close your Tennessee Spatial Data Server site down as well. And now we can open up our Windows Explorer, and for DLG data we should see the two files there. Now a couple of you had, I think, some issues at this point. We want to process this file with the DLG to Shape program, and we want to do that